Classified operational log. Facility designation, Deepwell, 7. Recording officer, redacted, Deputy Administrative Coordinator. Timestamp, 14 hours 47 minutes and 22 seconds, day 3 post-incident. The presidential directive arrived at 6:30 this morning. Clear, unambiguous language regarding civilian population management in affected zones. Evacuation protocols are hereby suspended pending further assessment of containment viability. Or was it containment feasibility? Perhaps operational viability? The exact phrasing escapes me. Stress effects recall, naturally. Standard psychological response to crisis management scenarios. The document itself remains locked in the classified communications vault, security protocol preventing casual re-examination. The important element remains unchanged. We maintain operational integrity within established parameters. The air recycling system produces a distinct metallic tang now. Not concerning, well within acceptable operational variance. Our atmospheric specialists indicate the filtration arrays are performing at 93% efficiency, perhaps 91%. The readings fluctuate due to external atmospheric pressure differentials caused by the ongoing meteorological event outside. Irregular ticking from the ventilation shaft above. Mechanical stress indicators, nothing more. The senior administrative aide entered my office at 14:23. Unnecessary breach of established hierarchical communication protocols. Sir, the outer containment zones are reporting heavy particulate precipitation. Ashfall measurements exceed. It's under control, I informed him. Follow the directive. His expression suggested noncompliance with established chain of command expectations. A brief glance toward the secured eastern corridor, the family residential sector. Purely coincidental timing. My duties require periodic assessment of all facility sectors, including residential allocations for essential personnel dependents. The vent ticking intensifies briefly, then subsides. The particulate matter outside resembles snowfall in certain lighting conditions. Quite beautiful, actually. Reminds me of winters at the old campus before the integration wars reshaped our institutional frameworks. Back when containment meant something different. Academic containment. Intellectual quarantine of dangerous ideologies rather than this. We learned from those failures. The Riverside containment breach of 19, the Northwestern sector incident 2 years later. Institutional memory serves us well. The protocols exist for excellent reasons, developed through careful analysis of previous operational shortcomings. Emergency lighting flickers. Power management cycling through efficiency protocols. The communications array received 17 separate evacuation requests from municipal authorities this morning. Standard procedure dictates forwarding such requests through proper channels. Regional emergency coordination, federal disaster management, ultimately presidential oversight. The directive supersedes municipal authority in matters of national emergency classification. Acceptable losses is the clinical terminology. Not my phrasing. I prefer operational parameters within expected variance. More precise, less emotionally charged. My daughter's last transmission came through the family communication link at 13:45. She's safe in the eastern residential sector with the other essential personnel dependents. Climate-controlled environment, independent air circulation, stocks of emergency provisions calculated for extended operational periods. She asked about her school friends in the outer zones. Daddy, why can't they come inside? Standard operational security prevents disclosure of classified information to non-essential personnel, regardless of familial relationships. I explained that some people must remain at their assigned positions to maintain critical infrastructure. She accepted this explanation. Children adapt to new paradigms more efficiently than adults. The metallic taste grows stronger. Atmospheric recycling working harder to maintain optimal conditions. The senior aide returned at 14:31, carrying a tablet displaying external sensor readings. Particulate density measurements, radiation levels, atmospheric composition analysis. All within manageable parameters. The readings fluctuate, certainly, but fluctuation indicates system responsiveness, not system failure. Sir, the detection arrays show the ash cloud isn't dispersing. It's concentrating over the civilian sectors. Sensor calibration issues are common during atmospheric disturbances, I reminded him. The equipment requires recalibration following electromagnetic pulse events. This wasn't an EMP event, sir. This was. The technical classification of the incident remains under review by appropriate specialists. He stepped closer to my desk. Violation of established personal space protocols during official briefings. His breathing seemed labored, likely stress response to operational pressures. We're all feeling the strain of extended crisis management procedures. People are dying out there. Personnel are experiencing elevated exposure to environmental contaminants, I corrected. Medical intervention protocols remain under evaluation by health services coordination teams. The vent ticking becomes rhythmic, almost like a countdown, though that's anthropomorphizing mechanical systems. The presidential directive included supplementary instructions regarding information management. Prevent civilian panic through appropriate communication filtering. Standard crisis management protocol. Uncontrolled information dissemination leads to social disorder, which complicates rescue operations or recovery operations. The terminology shifts depending on operational phase progression. I've reviewed the directive 7 times since this morning. The language seems softer somehow, less definitive than initial readings suggested. Evacuation protocols are hereby suspended pending further assessment of containment viability. Was there additional text? A time limitation clause? The document transmission system sometimes truncates longer files during high traffic periods. I should request retransmission for verification purposes. Distant rumbling, possibly external weather systems, possibly facility infrastructure adjusting to operational stress. The eastern residential sector remains completely isolated from external atmospheric conditions. Triple sealed access points, independent life support systems, emergency provisions calculated for 6-month operational periods. My daughter's safety is, the safety of all essential personnel dependents is, guaranteed within established parameters. The senior aide's tablet displayed external imagery from the perimeter monitoring stations. Gray ash covering everything. Vehicles, buildings, what appeared to be human figures collapsed in the streets. But visual data can be misleading during adverse atmospheric conditions. Heat distortion, particulate interference, equipment malfunction. Sir, we need to open the evacuation centers. We have the capacity. Evacuation protocols are suspended per presidential directive, I repeated. Unauthorized population movement during containment operations compromises overall mission effectiveness. He stared at me for 4.7 seconds, excessive duration for professional acknowledgement of direct orders. Then he turned toward the communications console. Where are you going? To request clarification from Regional Emergency Coordination. The directive came directly from presidential authority. Regional coordination is not required for implementation. The emergency lighting flickers again. Longer duration this time. Power management systems working harder. Another childhood memory surfaces, the old university's emergency drills. Practice evacuations that never felt real because they weren't real. Just exercises designed to test system efficiency. Everyone laughing afterward, comparing notes about who forgot which procedural step. This feels similar, like we're all following a script, performing our assigned roles while waiting for someone to announce the exercise conclusion. Except the ash keeps falling, and the communications from the outer zones keep diminishing, and the air keeps tasting of metal and something else I can't quite identify. The vent ticking stops abruptly. The silence is somehow worse than the ticking. System malfunction indicators? Maintenance crew investigation required? I should contact Facility Engineering Services for diagnostic evaluation. But first, I need to review the presidential directive one more time. Verify the exact language. Ensure full compliance with established orders. Evacuation protocols are hereby suspended pending further assessment. The document feels different in my hands now. Heavier somehow. Classified operational log, facility designation, Deepwell, 7. Recording officer, redacted, Deputy Administrative Coordinator. Timestamp, 18 hours 23 minutes and 47 seconds, day 3 post-incident. Cross-referencing evacuation protocols with incoming atmospheric data requires systematic analysis of all available documentation. Standard procedure, verify operational parameters against real-time conditions before implementing crisis response modifications. The presidential directive sits before me, extracted from the classified vault after proper authorization procedures. Reading it again, the language appears fluid. Words seeming to shift emphasis depending on stress levels, fatigue factors, atmospheric pressure variations affecting cognitive function. Evacuation protocols are hereby suspended pending further assessment of containment viability and resource allocation optimization for essential personnel protection. That final phrase, resource allocation optimization for essential personnel protection, was that present in the original transmission? Memory reconstruction during crisis situations proves unreliable. The human brain prioritizes survival-relevant information while filtering secondary details. Air recycling system working noticeably harder. Mechanical strain evident in ventilation shaft rhythms. Facility engineering reported to Section 7 Delta at 1745. Standard consultation regarding atmospheric filtration efficiency during extended operational periods. Our HEPA filtration arrays, rated for biological and chemical contaminants, require calibration adjustments for the current particulate composition. The filters are completely clogged, sir, Senior Technician Reynolds informed me. Imprecise terminology. Filters achieve saturation points. They don't clog in the colloquial sense. Professional communication requires technical accuracy. Follow standard protocol, I instructed. Maintain operational parameters within established efficiency ranges. Reynolds exhibited the same noncompliance indicators as the senior administrative aide earlier: labored breathing, excessive perspiration, violation of professional distance protocols. Stress responses affect personnel behavior patterns during extended crisis management. The atmospheric analysis reveals particulate density measurements exceeding initial projections by approximately 47%. The ASH, technical designation, radioactive atmospheric debris, contains isotopic compositions requiring specialized filtration protocols not included in our standard emergency procedures manual. Temperature gauge indicates facility internal environment rising 2.3 degrees above optimal range. Protocol discovery, Emergency Procedures Manual, Section 12A. Seal all external ventilation access points during contamination events to prevent atmospheric infiltration of hazardous materials. Contradictory Protocol, Safety Procedures Manual, Section 8C. Maintain minimum ventilation circulation rates for personnel safety during extended facility occupation periods. The contradiction escaped initial notice due to documentation distribution across multiple operational manuals. Crisis management procedures assume protocol integration, but administrative oversight sometimes produces conflicting directives. Which protocol takes precedence during simultaneous contamination and extended occupation scenarios? I contacted Regional Emergency Coordination for clarification at 1752. The communication link established successfully, but the response came through encrypted channels routed via an unfamiliar relay designation. Covert Response Unit Alpha. Deputy Coordinator, your facility status remains green for all operational parameters. External atmospheric conditions show dispersal patterns indicating contamination reduction within 12-hour projections. Maintain current operational status. Dispersal patterns? Our perimeter sensors indicate particulate concentration, not dispersal. Unless sensor calibration errors produce inverted readings during electromagnetic interference periods. The New Strike incident aftermath documentation from 21 referenced similar sensor anomalies. But the Covert Response Unit designation wasn't mentioned in the Presidential Directive's distribution list. When did Covert Response Unit Alpha achieve authorization for emergency coordination communications? My security clearance should provide access to operational unit designations within our command structure. Metallic taste intensifying. Atmospheric recycling systems struggling with increased particulate load. Misremembered protocol. Radiation Exposure Manual, Section 4J. Initial recollection. Acceptable exposure thresholds for essential personnel. 50 millisievert over 24-hour periods. Verification attempt. Cannot locate Section 4J in current manual revision. Was this protocol updated after the integration wars? Memory consolidation during stress can conflate information from different time periods, different operational frameworks. Without accurate exposure threshold data, how do we evaluate personnel safety parameters? Reynolds returned at 1811 carrying improvised filtration components, additional HEPA units salvaged from storage areas, portable air circulation fans, medical-grade particle sensors jury-rigged to existing atmospheric monitoring systems. Sir, we can create an enhanced filtration array using these components. Might improve air quality by 30, maybe 40%. Will this modification comply with established safety protocols? Sir, there aren't any protocols for this situation. We're improvising. Improvisation falls outside standard operational parameters, but crisis management sometimes requires adaptive responses to unprecedented conditions. I authorized the modification at 1814. The enhanced filtration system activated at 1827. Initial performance indicators showed improvement. Particulate levels decreased from 847 micrograms per cubic meter to 623 micrograms per cubic meter within the first 10 minutes of operation. Then the system overloaded. The improvised components weren't rated for the particulate density we're experiencing. The additional HEPA units clogged, achieved saturation point, faster than standard units because they lacked proper housing protection against ash infiltration. When they failed, the increased air circulation actually drew more contaminated air through compromised seals in the ventilation system. Alarm indicators, atmospheric quality declining rapidly. Sir, Reynolds shouted over the ventilation system's strained mechanical noise. The ash is getting through the seals. The increased airflow created pressure differentials that opened microfractures in the vent housing. Particulate levels spiked to 1,247 micrograms per cubic meter. Personnel in the main operational areas began exhibiting respiratory distress symptoms, coughing, labored breathing, metallic taste reports identical to my own symptoms. Shut down the enhanced system, I ordered. Return to standard operational parameters. Sir, that won't clear the contamination that's already entered the facility. System shut down at 1839. But Reynolds was correct. The contamination couldn't be extracted, only contained. The improvised solution worsened our situation by introducing additional contaminants into previously secure areas. Emergency lighting flickering more frequently. Power systems struggling with increased ventilation demands. The senior administrative aide arrived at 1845, tablet displaying external sensor readings that contradicted the covert response unit's dispersal projections. Sir, the ash concentration over civilian sectors has increased by 63% since the covert response unit's last transmission. This isn't dispersing, it's accumulating. Sensor equipment requires recalibration following atmospheric disturbances, I reminded him. The readings may not reflect actual conditions. Sir, these readings come from 12 different sensor arrays across the metropolitan area. They can't all be malfunctioning. He stepped closer to my desk again. Same violation of professional distance protocols as before. But his breathing was more labored now, and small gray particles clung to his uniform sleeves. People are suffocating in the ash. The hospitals stopped responding to radio calls 2 hours ago. The schools, medical facilities experience communication difficulties during crisis periods. I interrupted. Equipment failure, personnel reallocation, power management issues. The schools are full of children who couldn't get home when this started. They're trapped. The vent ticking resumes, faster now, more erratic. System stress indicators throughout the facility infrastructure. I accessed the communications log at 1852. 17 separate distress calls from municipal emergency services. 43 requests for evacuation authorization from local government representatives. 112 individual emergency beacon activations from civilian communication devices. All forwarded to higher authority per the presidential directive. No responses received. The covert response unit transmitted an updated assessment at 1858. Atmospheric conditions continue improving. Maintain facility security. External evacuation operations would compromise containment effectiveness and endanger evacuee populations. Maintain facility security. The directive concerned evacuation suspension, not facility security protocols. When did security maintenance become part of our operational orders? Sir, the senior administrative aide said, I'm going to contact the municipal emergency coordinator directly. We have the communication equipment, we have the authority during federal emergency periods. The presidential directive supersedes municipal coordination authority. Sir, with respect, we don't know if that directive is legitimate. Silence. The implications of his statement requiring careful consideration. The directive came through proper channels with appropriate authentication codes. The authentication codes could be fabricated. The covert response unit isn't listed in any organizational chart I can access. Their communication relay designation doesn't appear in our authorized contact database. He moved toward the communications console. Unauthorized access to classified communication equipment would constitute a violation of federal emergency protocols. Where are you going? To save lives, sir. While we still can. My daughter's face appears in my mind, her question from earlier. Daddy, why can't they come inside? The eastern residential sector remains sealed, protected, safe. But the children in the schools outside, they ask the same question. Different children asking their parents the same question. Temperature rising. 4.7 degrees above optimal now. The facility infrastructure struggling against atmospheric contamination and system overload. Time remaining until atmospheric conditions become unmanageable. Approximately 11 hours and 37 minutes. The presidential directive feels heavier in my hands. The paper seems different, cheaper stock, slightly different letterhead formatting. Or is stress affecting my perception of familiar documents? Evacuation protocols are hereby suspended pending further assessment of containment viability and resource allocation optimization for essential personnel protection. Essential personnel protection. My daughter qualifies as essential personnel dependent. But what about the other children? What makes one child essential and another acceptable loss? I should review the directive again. Verify the exact language one more time. But first, I need to determine whether the Covert Response Unit Alpha actually exists. Classified Operational Log, Facility Designation, Deepwell 7. Recording Officer, Redacted, Deputy Administrative Coordinator. Timestamp, 21 hours 47 minutes and 23 seconds, Day 3 post-incident. Warning, atmospheric containment breach, multiple sectors. The Covert Response Unit Alpha does not exist. Cross-referencing all classified organizational databases, emergency response unit registries, and interagency coordination protocols through our secure network access. No operational unit designation matches Covert Response Unit Alpha. The authentication codes accompanying their transmissions register as valid in our system, but the source verification traces to a relay station that appears in no official network topology. Every transmission we received originated from coordinates matching Safe Harbor 3's communication array. Someone has been feeding us fabricated information through Safe Harbor 3's communication systems while I maintained operational compliance with directives designed to serve their research agenda. Temperature, 7.2 degrees above optimal. Particulate density, 1,847 micrograms per cubic meter and climbing. Senior Administrative Aide Morrison. I remember his name now, stress-induced memory consolidation clearing. Returned to the command center at 2015 carrying a tablet displaying facility blueprints I hadn't seen before. Sir, I accessed the construction archives. The eastern residential wing, where your family quarters are located, that section has independent atmospheric systems. Triple redundant filtration, separate power grid, sealed circulation loops. The professional detachment I've maintained for 72 hours cracks like ice under pressure. That information is classified above your clearance level. Sir, I helped design the renovation specifications 2 years ago when you requested the administrative support wing expansion. The invoice documentation lists medical-grade atmospheric equipment, radiation-hardened seals, emergency life support systems rated for 6 months. Morrison stepped closer to my desk. Not a protocol violation this time, but a human being approaching another human being who can no longer hide behind bureaucratic distance. How many other families got moved to sections with medical-grade atmospheric equipment, sir? Ventilation system noise increases. Metal stress patterns audible throughout facility infrastructure. I cannot answer his question because the answer would require admitting that essential personnel protection meant protecting my personnel. Not essential personnel in general. My personnel specifically. Deputy Coordinator, Morrison continued, reading from his tablet, 47 facility maintenance staff and their families, 19 administrative coordinators and their dependents, 6 emergency management personnel and their households. The Eastern Wing has capacity for exactly 72 individuals based on atmospheric system specifications. 72. The exact number of people I could save when the presidential directive arrived. The exact number of people for whom I possessed both authority and emotional attachment to justify protection under resource allocation optimization for essential personnel. Ash particles visible in the air now. Gray specks drifting through emergency lighting beams. The Municipal Emergency Coordinator has been broadcasting continuous distress calls, Morrison said. manipulating his tablet display. Listen to this. Static crackling through the tablet speakers, then a woman's voice, hoarse from shouting. This is Emergency Coordinator Ellis. Day 3 post-incident. Approximate civilian count in unsecured areas, 8,400. Medical facilities at 0% capacity. Food distribution points abandoned. Requesting immediate evacuation authorization for transport to federal emergency shelters. 8,400 people. Breathing contaminated air. While my daughter plays in her secured room with medical-grade filtration systems processing every breath. Sir, we could have authorized partial evacuations. Prioritized children, medical vulnerable populations, essential civilian services. Even if we couldn't save everyone, we could have. The communications console erupted with incoming transmission alerts. 7 different emergency frequencies simultaneously activated, filling the command center with overlapping distress signals. Oxygen masks failing at Lincoln Elementary. Hospital generator down, patients on ventilation. Ash concentration making visibility impossible. Need medical supplies for radiation exposure. Children trapped in the gymnasium. Morrison reached for the communications controls. I'm authorizing emergency evacuations for medical facilities and schools. Federal emergency protocol gives us authority during communication blackouts with higher command. The directive explicitly suspends evacuation protocols. A fabricated directive from a non-existent unit. His professional composure finally shattered. You're letting children suffocate to protect a lie. Pressure alarm indicates ventilation system approaching critical failure threshold. The tablet in Morrison's hands displayed something that made him stop moving entirely. Security camera feeds from the facility's external perimeter. Hundreds of people pressed against the sealed entrance barriers, their faces covered with makeshift filters, ash-covered clothing, some carrying children who weren't moving. They know, Morrison whispered. They know this place has clean air. On the screen, I could see families pointing toward the facility, gesturing at the emergency lighting visible through reinforced windows. They could see safety, they just couldn't reach it. Sir, these people are dying because we're following orders from someone who doesn't exist, to protect resources we don't need to hoard, based on a directive that might have been fabricated from the beginning. The irregular vent ticking returns, much faster now, arrhythmic like a failing heart. I accessed the presidential directive's metadata through our classified document authentication system. Information I should have verified immediately, but professional protocol assumes document legitimacy when received through appropriate channels. Document creation timestamp, 6 hours before the incident occurred. Document authentication trail, routing through Safe Harbor 3's secure communication hub. Document authorization signatures, digital fabrications using stolen authentication certificates. Someone at Safe Harbor 3 knew. Someone prepared a directive canceling evacuations before the atmospheric contamination began. Someone anticipated exactly this scenario and fabricated presidential authority to ensure that when it happened, proper authority figures would maintain containment by refusing to allow population dispersal. But the real presidential directive, the actual emergency response authorization from federal command, that transmission came through different channels entirely. Buried in routine administrative traffic, authenticated with rotating security codes, timestamp matching the incident occurrence. Immediate implementation of emergency evacuation protocols for all civilian populations within contamination zones. Prioritize medical facilities, educational institutions, and residential areas. Federal emergency shelters activated at coordinates. Morrison was reading over my shoulder. Sir, this is the real directive. This is what we should have been following. Facility emergency lighting switches to battery backup. Main power systems failing under atmospheric system overload. The fabricated directive in my hands suddenly feels like evidence of treason. Not just administrative error, deliberate manipulation designed to prevent evacuation during a radiological emergency. Someone wanted those people outside to remain trapped. Someone wanted containment more than survival. Morrison, how many federal facilities in this region have the capability to house civilian populations during extended emergencies? Sir, based on the documentation I've reviewed, approximately 12 facilities. But only 3 have the atmospheric processing capacity for long-term occupation during contamination events. And those 3 facilities? Deepwell 7, Granite Mountain 12, and Safe Harbor 3. Safe Harbor 3. I remember that designation from interagency coordination meetings. High security research facility, restricted access, specialized in biological and radiological research programs. Their atmospheric systems would be superior to ours, designed for complete environmental isolation. If someone wanted to ensure survival of specific populations while maintaining research operational capabilities during a radiological emergency, Safe Harbor 3 would provide both protection and scientific resources. Morrison's tablet chimed with an incoming priority transmission, not from the non-existent Covert Response Unit Alpha. From Safe Harbor 3 directly. Deepwell 7, this is Research Coordinator Voss, Safe Harbor 3. Be advised, atmospheric decontamination procedures will commence at 2300 hours via dispersal of experimental atmospheric processing compounds. Maintain facility seal. Do not authorize external population movement that might compromise decontamination effectiveness. Mechanical failure sounds intensifying throughout ventilation systems. Experimental atmospheric processing compounds? Morrison stared at his tablet. They're going to test experimental decontamination methods on a contaminated population? The fabricated directive makes sense now. Keep civilian populations in contaminated areas not for containment, for experimentation. Use them as test subjects for atmospheric decontamination procedures that haven't been validated through normal scientific protocols. 8,400 people serving as test subjects while we monitor results from sealed facilities. Morrison, authorize immediate emergency evacuation for all civilian populations. Override all previous directives. Open facility atmospheric processing to maximum civilian capacity. Sir, that will compromise the specialized environmental protection for essential personnel in the Eastern Wing. My daughter's face appears in my mind again, but this time, surrounded by the faces of 8,400 other children who are breathing contaminated air because I followed fabricated orders from people conducting illegal human experimentation. The Eastern Wing environmental systems will accommodate approximately 400 additional people if we reduce atmospheric processing efficiency to minimum safe levels. Sir, that's not enough for even a fraction of the external population. Then we open all facility sectors. We become an evacuation center instead of a command bunker. Ventilation system failure alarm activates. Critical atmospheric breach in multiple facility sectors. Morrison moved toward the communications console again, but this time I didn't stop him. Emergency Coordinator Ellis, this is Deepwell 7. Authorization granted for immediate civilian evacuation to our facility. Capacity approximately 500 individuals. Prioritize children and medical vulnerable populations. Static, then Ellis's voice clearer now. Deepwell 7 confirmed. Transport vehicles mobilizing now. Estimate first arrivals in 23 minutes. Explosive decompression sound from ventilation shafts. Choking dust and metallic debris raining from ceiling panels as seals fail catastrophically. The facility's atmospheric systems can't handle this additional load. Opening the facility to 500 additional people, while our filtration systems are already failing, will compromise everyone's survival. But leaving them outside guarantees their deaths, while research coordinators at Safe Harbor 3 observe experimental decontamination effects on human subjects. The real presidential directive specified federal emergency shelter coordinates. I transmitted those coordinates to Emergency Coordinator Ellis. She can redirect the evacuation to facilities actually designed for mass civilian protection instead of forcing them into our failing bunker systems. Morrison, calculate travel time from current civilian locations to the federal emergency shelter coordinates. Sir, approximately 47 minutes by transport vehicle. 47 minutes of exposure to atmospheric contamination before reaching proper shelter. Some of those people won't survive the journey. Facility structural stress indicators suggest imminent system failure. My tablet displays a new transmission from Safe Harbor 3. Deepwell 7, unauthorized population movement detected. Maintain facility isolation or risk compromising research protocols. Risk compromising research protocols. They're not even attempting to disguise the human experimentation anymore. I activated the facility's emergency broadcast system, the one that can override civilian communication frequencies across the metropolitan area. Attention civilian populations. This is Deputy Administrative Coordinator, redacted, Deepwell 7. The evacuation suspension directive was fabricated. Proceed immediately to Federal Emergency Shelter coordinates 40.2731 degrees north, 86.1349 degrees west. Federal transportation assets are en route to assist evacuation. Avoid experimental atmospheric processing compounds. This is not a drill. Morrison stared at me. Sir, you just committed treason against whoever fabricated that directive. Morrison, I just stopped committing treason against the actual government. Facility power systems failing. Emergency lighting dimming throughout command center. 23 minutes until the first civilian transports arrive at our facility. 47 minutes until the federal emergency shelters can begin processing evacuees. Unknown time until Safe Harbor 3 begins dispersing experimental atmospheric compounds. The fabricated presidential directive sits on my desk, worthless now except as evidence of conspiracy. But the real directive, the one buried in administrative traffic, that document represents the actual federal response to this emergency. My daughter will survive. She has sealed quarters, medical-grade filtration, protected atmospheric systems. But she'll survive in a world where her father chose to protect hundreds of strangers instead of maintaining the institutional conspiracy that would have guaranteed her safety at the cost of thousands of lives. Morrison activated the emergency communication frequencies. All federal facilities in the region. This is Deepwell 7. Priority alert, Safe Harbor 3 operating under falsified presidential authority. They fabricated evacuation suspension directives to maintain civilian test populations for unauthorized atmospheric decontamination experiments. Coordinate immediate evacuation to legitimate federal emergency shelters. Disregard any further transmissions from fabricated Covert Response Unit Alpha. Catastrophic atmospheric system failure. Gray ash beginning to infiltrate command center through compromised seals. The vent ticking stops entirely. Not because the system stabilized, because the system failed completely. In approximately 6 hours, when Safe Harbor 3 disperses their experimental compounds into the atmosphere, we'll discover whether their decontamination procedures work on human subjects. But those human subjects will be research coordinators conducting illegal experiments, not the civilian populations they intended to sacrifice. Emergency Coordinator Ellis's voice crackled through the speakers. Deepwell 7. Federal emergency shelters report capacity for 12,000 individuals. Evacuation transport arriving at civilian locations now. 12,000 people. More than enough capacity for everyone in the contaminated areas. The conspiracy wasn't about resource scarcity. It was about maintaining test subject populations for experimental research. Facility atmospheric integrity compromised. All personnel exhibiting respiratory distress symptoms. Morrison handed me a respirator mask from the emergency supplies. Sir, what do we tell your family about the Eastern Wing environmental systems? We tell them the truth. The systems are designed to protect essential personnel. Today, essential personnel includes everyone we can save. The ash is falling like snow outside the reinforced windows. But through the gray haze, I can see transport vehicles with flashing emergency lights moving toward the federal shelter coordinates. My daughter will ask why we let the strangers inside her safe place. I'll tell her that sometimes keeping people safe means sharing safety instead of hoarding it. Classified operational log, facility designation, Deepwell 7. Recording officer, redacted, Deputy Administrative Coordinator. Timestamp, 2 hours 14 minutes and 7 seconds, day 4 post-incident. Warning, facility atmospheric integrity compromised, all sectors. The experimental atmospheric processing compounds dispersed at 23:47 hours. Safe Harbor 3's decontamination procedure worked. Atmospheric particulate density dropped from 1,847 micrograms per cubic meter to 340 within 6 hours. Respiratory distress symptoms among facility personnel decreased significantly. External air quality readings approach acceptable thresholds for limited exposure. But Research Coordinator Voss and his team at Safe Harbor 3 experienced the full effects of their experimental compounds in an enclosed facility designed for complete atmospheric isolation. Their final transmission arrived at 1:23 hours. Decontamination compounds, unexpected reactions with sealed atmospheric systems, caustic interaction with recycled air processing, facility atmospheric integrity compromised beyond repair. No further communications from Safe Harbor 3. Their atmospheric monitoring stations went dark at 1:31 hours. Emergency lighting restored to partial capacity. Facility structural integrity stabilized. Morrison returned from the civilian processing center at 2 o'clock hours. Dark circles under his eyes, ash still dusting his jacket despite decontamination procedures. He carries the tablet that's become our lifeline to the outside world. Sir, final evacuation numbers. 8,847 civilians successfully transported to federal emergency shelters. Medical vulnerable populations processed first, 0 casualties during transport. Emergency Coordinator Ellis reports all federal shelter facilities operating within capacity limits. 8,847 people. More than I thought survived the initial contamination. More than the original count Ellis broadcast during our containment period. Casualties from the experimental compounds? Morrison consulted his tablet, expression carefully neutral. Based on atmospheric monitoring data from the federal shelters, the decontamination procedure appears to have eliminated 92% of airborne particulates. Civilian populations exposed to the compounds experienced temporary respiratory irritation, but no permanent adverse effects. And Safe Harbor, 3 personnel? Sir, search and rescue teams reached their facility at 0:45 hours. Atmospheric contamination from compound reactions with their sealed systems proved fatal. Estimated casualties, 47 research personnel, including Research Coordinator Voss. 47 people who created the fabricated directive, manipulated federal emergency protocols, and planned to use 8,000 civilians as test subjects for experimental decontamination procedures. They died testing their own compounds in conditions they hadn't anticipated, sealed atmospheric systems that concentrated the caustic effects instead of dispersing them. Facility ventilation systems operating at 47% efficiency. Atmospheric quality approaching normal parameters. Morrison, status of facility personnel and families? Sir, Eastern Wing Atmospheric Systems maintain sufficient protection for all 72 essential personnel and their dependents. Your daughter asked about the emergency guests using the main facility areas. She wants to know when they can play together. My daughter, protected in her sealed quarters while I authorized opening the facility to 500 civilian evacuees. The specialized environmental systems I arranged for my family's protection ultimately saved dozens of other families when our main atmospheric processing failed completely. But she survived not because of privileged access to resources. She survived because sharing those resources with others created redundant safety systems that protected everyone more effectively than hoarding protection for a select few. Morrison, I need you to prepare a comprehensive report documenting the fabricated directive, the authentication trail leading to Safe Harbor 3, and the evidence of planned human experimentation. Submit it directly to Federal Emergency Management and the Congressional Oversight Committee responsible for emergency response protocols. Morrison looked up from his tablet. Sir, that report will document your initial compliance with the fabricated directive. It will show that you followed illegal orders for approximately 72 hours before discovering their fraudulent nature. The report will show that federal emergency response protocols lack sufficient authentication safeguards to prevent future manipulation by unauthorized research facilities. It will recommend mandatory cross-verification of all emergency directives and real-time communication with multiple federal agencies during crisis situations. And your career, sir? My career. Deputy Administrative Coordinator for a federal facility that housed essential personnel and their families during a radiological emergency. I followed fabricated presidential orders, maintained resource allocation for privileged populations, and delayed civilian evacuation while unauthorized researchers prepared to conduct illegal human experimentation. Until I discovered the fraud, authorized emergency evacuation, and exposed the conspiracy that resulted in saving 8,000 lives while preventing unauthorized human testing of experimental decontamination compounds. Morrison, my career involved protecting essential personnel during emergency situations. Yesterday, I learned that essential personnel includes everyone we have the capacity to protect, not just the people we have personal reasons to save. Atmospheric processing systems cycling to full operational capacity. Clean air flow restored throughout all facility sectors. The communications console displays a priority transmission from the Federal Emergency Management Coordinator. Deepwell, 7, this is Federal Emergency Command. Your facility's actions during the atmospheric contamination event have been classified as exemplary emergency response under extraordinary circumstances. Congressional investigation into the fabricated directive manipulation will require your testimony, but no disciplinary actions are anticipated. Request preparation of detailed operational recommendations for preventing similar authentication failures. No disciplinary actions. They want recommendations instead of punishments. The federal government recognizes that following fabricated orders for 72 hours was reasonable under the circumstances, and that exposing the fraud ultimately prevented a larger humanitarian catastrophe. Morrison, what's the current status of civilian populations in the affected areas? Sir, atmospheric contamination levels continue decreasing. Federal emergency shelters report all evacuees in stable condition. Medical teams treating respiratory symptoms with full recovery expected. Emergency Coordinator Ellis requests authorization to begin coordinating civilian return to decontaminated residential areas within 48 hours. 48 hours. People returning to their homes, breathing clean air, rebuilding communities that survived because federal emergency protocols worked correctly once we stopped following fabricated orders. Facility external security cameras display dawn light filtering through clearing atmospheric conditions. Gray ash settling on surfaces, but no longer suspended in breathing air. Morrison approached my desk, not maintaining professional protocol distance, but as a colleague who shared the experience of discovering that our institutional responsibilities required protecting humanity rather than protecting institutions. Sir, there's something else. The federal emergency shelters forwarded a message from Emergency Coordinator Ellis. She wanted you to know that the transport vehicles were able to evacuate everyone because the warning broadcast gave them sufficient time to reach multiple pickup locations. She estimates the early warning saved approximately 2,000 additional lives by enabling evacuation of residential areas that hadn't been included in initial emergency response planning. 2,000 additional lives. People who survived because I broadcast the real federal emergency shelter coordinates instead of maintaining the fabricated evacuation suspension. My tablet displays a new message from the Eastern Wing residential quarters. Daddy, the air smells better now. Can I play outside with the other kids? Other kids. The civilian families we sheltered in the main facility areas include 43 children under the age of 12. My daughter wants to play with children whose parents trusted federal emergency protocols enough to bring them to a facility operated by the same government that initially seemed to abandon them. Morrison authorized supervised outdoor activities for all facility children. Atmospheric conditions are safe for limited exposure, and social interaction will help process the psychological effects of emergency shelter experience. Sir, that means mixing essential personnel children with civilian evacuee children. Morrison, that means letting children be children instead of maintaining artificial social hierarchies during recovery operations. Facility atmospheric systems operating at optimal efficiency. All emergency protocols deactivated. Normal operational status restored. The fabricated directive sits in my desk drawer now, preserved as evidence for the congressional investigation. But the real presidential directive, the authentic federal emergency response authorization, remains displayed on my primary monitor. Immediate implementation of emergency evacuation protocols for all civilian populations within contamination zones. Prioritize medical facilities, educational institutions, and residential areas. Federal emergency shelters activated. Orders I should have followed immediately. Orders I would have followed if our authentication systems had been designed to prevent manipulation by unauthorized research facilities conducting illegal human experimentation. Morrison saved his work on the tablet and looked up. Sir, one final question. How do we prevent this from happening again? Morrison, we implement mandatory cross-verification protocols requiring authentication from multiple federal agencies before implementing any emergency directive that suspends standard humanitarian response procedures. No single facility or organization should have the capability to fabricate federal emergency orders. And if someone tries to manipulate the system again, I looked at the communications console where Emergency Coordinator Ellis's contact information remained active, where the Federal Emergency Management Coordinator's priority channel stayed open, where 8,847 people had trusted federal institutions enough to evacuate to authorized shelter locations. Morrison, if someone tries to manipulate emergency response protocols again, they'll discover that federal personnel take their oath to protect and serve the American people very seriously. And that oath includes protecting people from unauthorized government research programs that treat human beings as expendable test subjects. Facility status: all systems operational. All personnel accounted for. All emergency objectives achieved. The irregular vent ticking never returned. Our atmospheric systems operate smoothly now, processing clean air for essential personnel and their families, but also for the civilian families who trusted us with their children's lives when institutional protocols failed and human judgment succeeded. Tomorrow, Emergency Coordinator Ellis will begin coordinating civilian return to decontaminated residential areas. The federal emergency shelters will transition from emergency operation to recovery coordination. The congressional investigation will examine how research facilities can fabricate presidential orders and manipulate federal emergency responses. And my daughter will play outside with other children whose survival depended on federal employees choosing humanity over hierarchy when institutional systems failed. The atmospheric contamination is clearing. The experimental compounds proved effective for decontamination, but fatal for the people who created them in sealed facilities designed for complete environmental isolation. The conspiracy succeeded in testing experimental decontamination compounds on human populations, but the human populations were the research personnel who planned to use civilians as test subjects, not the civilians they intended to sacrifice. Morrison gathered his equipment and headed toward the exit. "Sir, see you tomorrow for the congressional testimony preparation?" "Morrison, see you tomorrow. We have recommendations to write about preventing future authentication failures and protecting federal emergency response protocols from unauthorized manipulation." He paused at the doorway. "Sir, do you think we did the right thing?" Outside the reinforced windows, I can see children playing in the facility's secured courtyard area. My daughter running alongside kids from families who spent 4 days breathing contaminated air because someone fabricated federal orders to prevent their evacuation. All of them breathing clean air now. All of them alive because federal emergency protocols worked correctly when we stopped following fabricated orders and started following authentic federal directives designed to protect American citizens during radiological emergencies. Morrison, I think we learned that protecting essential personnel means protecting everyone we have the capacity to save, not just the people we have personal reasons to protect. Final entry. Operational log concluded. All emergency objectives achieved. Federal emergency response protocols validated. Congressional testimony scheduled. Facility restored to normal operations. The ashes settled. The air is clean. The children are playing. And the real presidential directive remains displayed on my monitor, reminding me that federal emergency orders exist to protect people, not to enable research programs that treat human beings as expendable resources. Sometimes institutional protocols fail. Sometimes fabricated orders manipulate federal employees into following illegal directives. Sometimes research facilities conduct unauthorized human experimentation using fabricated presidential authority. But sometimes federal personnel discover the fraud, expose the conspiracy, save 8,000 lives, and learn that their oath to protect and serve the American people applies especially when institutional systems fail and human judgment must succeed. The experimental atmospheric processing compounds work effectively for decontamination, but they work best when applied to save human lives instead of sacrificing them for research purposes. End operational log.